Right guys, this is a sword video that I need your help with. Now, I've been contacted by an anonymous person. I don't think they mean to be anonymous, they've just not said who they are. And they've asked me to address these points, and fairly so, and correctly so. Now, the question is, how Japanese is this Chinese swordsmanship? Now, if you don't know, I've been studying or looking at the manual, which is basically the military techniques after agricultural work. Basically, do some martial arts after you finish your farming. And in there's an there's a warrior from China, and he basically put together lots of different martial arts, and one of them was the Japanese longsword, which he clearly states, this is Japanese, this is from Japan. This is what I've inherited from my teacher, who inherited it directly from a Japanese person, and from the Japanese, and he was Japanese, and this is Japanese. But the question becomes is, how much change has it gone through in those times? And the gentleman, I assume it's a gentleman, who messaged me, had some great points. So I need you to help me answer some of these points. But to start with, let's start with some basics, and some basics that we shouldn't jump the gun on, okay? I'm working with Stephen Nuggieri in the background, and we're looking at really understanding how swordsmanship changed. And one of the major points that the gent has come up with is that this swordsmanship doesn't really look that Japanese, to be honest. However, that's the fundamental crux of my argument, is that just because Japanese swordsmanship looks Japanese now, doesn't mean it was Japanese in the 1500s. So there's a really big shift. We're starting to discover a really big shift in Japanese swordsmanship around the 1500s somewhere. It doesn't happen overnight, but there's clearly a shift from what happened before that time to what happened after that time. And I want to state to you now, if you're imagining how Japanese swordsmanship was before, I'm just going to pick the date, 1550, you're making it up. Nobody knows, okay? Japanese swordsmanship was like this from 1550. We have zero evidence of that. Zero. Swordsmanship people will go, oh, Katori Shinto Ryu. You find me an identifiable Katori Shinto Ryu scroll that explains how they do it, and I'll give you, a big kiss. The question here is, how much has it changed? Now, I've recently been studying Yagyu Shinkagyu a lot, and it turns out the changes from the year 1606 to 1707 to then 18 to then are phenomenally massive. The changes go from, we start in Jodan, we do this. Their Jodans are probably even right foot forward, not left foot forward. But we all go to Jodan left foot forward because we think it is. But actually then there's different ways to go. And just even in 3 generations, the katas went from Jodan to Chudan to Gedan in their starting positions. Makes it a totally different kata. Totally changed. And that's from 1606. If you push it back even further, there is a massive cultural change in swords. And this is from Tachi, which are worn Tachi style, to Uchigatana. And we know through the book Flashing Steel, which is Eshin Ryu, it says we used to do Iaido from the 1550s totally different. We used to do swordsmanship differently, and you actually quick draw it upwards. Now we all go down and out, but it was the other way round, and this has changed because we now wear Uchigatana and Katana. So actually from 1550 it's totally changed. That's roughly about the same time that this Japanese gentleman will have gone to China to teach Master A, who teaches Master B, who writes the scroll. Okay, so we have a really big issue with what is Japanese swordsmanship. The crux of the question is, we don't know. That's why we're looking for it. And if you say, well, Japanese swordsmanship should really look like Japanese swordsmanship today. Not really, because the swords changed. We have a massive change in the style and shape of swords from, two-handed, wacky sword killing, horse killing things, to sort of much closer, more dainty, if you like, swords we duel with. But then they become big and all that. But the point being is, they're big battlefield swords which are used in battlefield ways, and then they change to much lighter, shorter swords because the world changes and they're used in a different way and possibly fought with in a different way. We don't know. That's the question, and we don't have the answer to. This is where I'm going. So I'm now going to go through the main points. The gentleman sent me a very long email, which was very detailed and very excellent. So, and 10 points to him for bringing these things up. He's clearly got a good knowledge of swordsmanship. And I'm going to try and answer some of the questions here. and you can help me. Now, one of the main ones here is, in the manual, it's called stealing step, and it's a cross step, yeah? And it's a cross step. And he says he's never seen the cross step used in Koryu, Japanese Koryu. And I must admit, I can't answer that question. Can anybody out there answer it? In the Chinese, see, we've got another element here, is the man who wrote this down also wrote non-Japanese martial arts down, where he had cross steps and small. Now, admittedly, these cross steps are not massive within the system. There's a couple of examples of it. But I personally believe cross-stepping existed in Japanese swordsmanship back in the day, because I don't believe people on, and I have no proof for this, this is just a belief, I don't believe people on a battlefield didn't cross-step with all the terrain problems. They didn't like walk like without cross-stepping. I just don't believe it. I know in later Japanese stuff you don't get much cross-stepping. I know we're doing the Bujinkan, but the Bujinkan is not Koryu. So does anybody out there know of any cross-stepping in any traditional Japanese martial arts from pre-1868? Do we get any examples of it? Right. Now, the next set of scrolls is the next issue is that there's some positions where they lift the leg up. Their legs are lifted, and they start from this position. Now, I don't believe they started in these positions that much. But again, this is my opinion off the feel of the text. I get the impression that all of these things move in together, and that if you end up in this position, then you can move, you can move to this position, or you might end up in this position. I don't believe that these are specific. You're walking along and somebody comes up with a spear and you go, oh, I'll adopt my position, lift my leg like this, and we've got a leg in the air and we're doing this. I don't believe that's how it was. I believe in battle, people walk around normally and they're just going normally, but in the middle of combat, somebody comes out from you at the side, you might have done something, you may end up in various positions with different people coming at you. And I think, from my opinion, that this is actually just, these stances are positions you will find yourself in. Now, this is where we get onto a linguistic or type thing. In the old days, before all the katas and scrolls and all that, you're just going to get your dad or your uncle teaching you how to fight when you live on your farm, and you farm in the farming months and you war in the warring months. And your uncle and your dads are teaching, your older brothers are teaching you how to fight. And the simple fact is stances are probably a later adaptation of battlefield realities. It's like, right, you might be in a battlefield and you're going to end up in this position after you've cut. Jack Chen talks about this. He says this weird, it's called like the twisted position. It's here and your thing is here. He said that actually most likely it's a cut, and that's exactly where you end up. When you go to cut someone without stepping, you just cut, you're on the wrong side. You've got to go from there. So it's my belief that these aren't specific, like one man walks, another man walks, he stops, he lifts his leg, he gets in his sword stance, the other man adopts the stance and they go at it. I believe it's chaos, and you're walking normally and you might just end up there and you're like, right, I'm in this position, and because I've trained time and time again, I know that comes in, I do this and I'm up. Yep, I believe that. So how much has the staff manual so the next question is, how much has a staff manual affected? So one of his questions here is the fact that he sees similarities in the staff manual, such as thrusting with one hand and, hitting with a long sword. Now, this is where we can bring in Musashi. Musashi thrusts one-handed. He absolutely does. In fact, Musashi says in the old days, most people would fight one-handed. However, I'm not 100% sure he's right in that. That's another big question for swordsmanship. He says in the old days, we fought one-handed, or he says, it's better to fight one-handed. But I do find Jesuit accounts which say they hold their swords above their hands. They hold them in two hands above their heads. So, and then they fight like this. And that's the problem we have. We have one source that tells us you should use one hand and you stab with one hand and you cut with one hand. And he's probably talking about even tachi fighting with one hand, and you only back up with the other one when you want to force things in. So we have that issue there. So to answer the question of what about the one-handed stabs and one-handed thrusts, stabs and swings on a large sword, I would say absolutely was used. I would absolutely say you've got one up, two. There would be no problem with swapping around as long as you are fluid and you're moving, and you're not just walking around like using a rapier style. You're going to have to come in and cut, but sometimes you come back with just one hand and you can butcher it with one hand. It's not hard. The swords are not that heavy. They're really not that heavy, and they should be well balanced at the hilt anyway, so you can whack up and wield. Some medieval weapons are pretty, you've got to be a bit of a stout character to keep fighting with a medieval weapon. They're not heavy, but it's also not, dead easy. So the idea of one-handed stabbing, I think, is no problem. It's going to be used in China. It's going to be used in Japan. We have evidence of one-handed stabbing in Japan through the Miyamoto Musashi manuals, and that's cool. It doesn't seem to be a massive problem. Now, the next question, he says, why does the manual only focus on the spear? Surely Japanese swordsmanship should be sword versus sword. Now, this is a key point. This is a key point, and it's exactly why I believe this is closer to Japanese swordsmanship than most people, or we think, is because 1500s Japan, remember, this is where this manual came from, 1500 Japan. It only gets into the 1600s because it goes down 2 generations. And absolutely, in the 1500s, without a shadow of a doubt, people are fighting with spears. If you are going onto a Japanese battlefield, not Chinese, you're on a Japanese battlefield in the 1590s, you are not going to be attacked with a sword. The number one killer of soldiers in the Japanese battlefield is projectile weapons, and then it starts getting into spears. Yep, so spears are killing you, not swords. Swords are way down the list on wounds on skeletal finds from the archaeological record. They're way down. Spears are way up. So basically, if you're not going to get shot or hit with a rock or hit with an arrow, you are going to get speared to death. So the number one thing you need to defend yourself with a sword, with a sword, is to know how to defend against a spear. So this is one of those where people have gone into Japanese swordsmanship is sword v sword. No, it's not. Japanese swordsmanship is when your spear has gone, you either pull out your very short sword and start knifing people, or your tachi comes out, which you all Japanese samurai have their tachi at their side, even when they've got spears. You see it, we've got them there in, art and literature and everything. So just because I have lost my spear doesn't mean the enemy has lost his spear. Most likely, if I went back in time and I was fighting on a Japanese battlefield, I am fighting spearmen. Ashigaru spearmen, samurai spearmen, mounted spearmen, archers, arquebusiers. I am not fighting swordsmen. Swords are there as a backup. Yep, even mounted people, spear is number one. So the idea of asking why is it sword v spear is absolutely a great idea, of a great addition to why this manual is definitely, an idea of Japanese swordsmanship, is because it talks about fighting with spears, not swords, which I think is perfect, if you get my meaning. Right, sword used in formation. Now, I agree with this is one of one. So Jack Chen from Chinese Longsword says, you've got to pull it up all the way this way. Instead of like cutting this way and diagonally up, you've got to cut almost up because you don't want to hit, he uses the word teammate, which is, basically people in your platoon. And most likely, the Japanese were not doing that so much, but this is one of them. This is again where we jump to conclusions. The Japanese swordsman is alone and he fights alone and he can wield his sword everywhere. Actually, we know that they form up in formations. So both the Chinese and the Japanese are getting into formation, and they're using the crane's wing, and they're using this wing, and then they go, then it breaks up. So realistically, if you're a swordsman and you're working with other people, you are gonna not really it's not really going to affect you too much if you have to change the angle because somebody's next to you, or if we've got into skirmishes, okay, we can start cutting down now and start mowing people down. You're just going to change the angle. You don't want to hit Bob and you don't want to hit Joe, but Bob and Joe have now buggered off and they're fighting some other people. I can ease it up a bit. I can do that. But I don't believe that the dual draw is the dual draw. I don't think the Japanese ever did that. I think that's a Chinese influence without a doubt. I do. So, he talks about the low number of guards used in the manual. So in this manual, the low number of guards in Japanese manuals like Jodan, Chudan, Gedan, and all that. And then in this one, there's lots of different positions. Now, this goes back to my original point. I don't think it's about, this is the position we walk up in, I adopt this, and I go forward. I genuinely think you're into something's happened. you've arrived at this position, you've arrived at this position, this is where you go from. Most likely you're in some sort of just average middle position waiting for the fight to start, then you arrive in the crossbow stance, or you've moved up and you're fighting, you've hit someone, somebody's going to put the spear in, so you move it and click up and then come round, and then you'll find yourself here, so you're up and over, and you're battling through people. And I don't think it's this static, we stake a stance. So well, then you say, well, why does it appear in Japanese swordsmanship? Because nearly all of the Japanese swordsmanship we have today, nearly all of it is after this change from tachi to uchigatana, and from basically mass, how can I say this? Katori Shinto Ryu, yeah? Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, all of them, it never talks really about fighting different people on the battlefield. It's like one-on-one, and it's usually set up for you to get into position so you understand how to fight and kill people. That's the problem. They don't say, right guys, you're on a battlefield, you're getting arrows shot at you, and this is what's going to happen, and you're probably going to get 2 or 3 people, one trying to cut your neck and the other one trying to stab you from. It doesn't tell you what to do. So what should a real samurai do? We don't know. It doesn't tell you. I can't find it. No sword school says, this is what we do on the front line of battle when there's an Ashigaru spearman there, or the bows are shooting in. It doesn't tell you. So when we say, well, there's this many guards in Japanese, but there's too many in this Chinese one, which claims to be Japanese, that's probably because their times are different when the guards appear. And then basically what you're finding is swordsmanship changes in a 50-year period, and you're probably finding that it's been honed down from tachi, like battlefield wheeling going in, down to case of like, right, we've got shorter swords, we're coming close to each other, there's nobody else, there's just me and you, so let's adopt positions and wait, and it becomes a much more different thing then, which is a problem. So basically we do find lots of different stances. If you look in Kansuke's, I can't remember exactly how many you get, but I should have really checked it before this video, but I think there's like 8 different stances or something like that. And the Yagyu ones, there's like 4 different Jodans. So to answer the question there's 2 answers to this. Maybe there are the same amount of sword stances, it's just we haven't broken down the amount of Japanese ones there are, because there's actually a lot of Japanese ones, but they do look differently, I'll give him this. Or it could be that these stances are 1550 stances, and they're not really stances, they're people who've said, well, you might end up in this position, and by the time to get to the classic Japanese stances, you find that actually we've moved on in swordsmanship, and most of the swordsmanship is becoming Edo period, dueling type swordsmanship, because we have swordsmanship that goes back to 1400s, but you get me any information from anywhere that tells you what they did in the 1400s, just can't find it. Cannot find it. You can only find the changed version of swordsmanship, and they even say, the old masters say, we changed this has been changed. Even the masters have said this has changed. So there we go. So now long sequences, says there's a long sequence. Now he's clearly made up these sequences. The Chinese man has made up sequences based on the Japanese fighting styles, and he's got this long sequence that goes, and he goes around everything and all that, but you actually find lots of long sequences in Katori Shinto Ryu. In fact, the sequences are very long, so there's clearly an idea that Katori Shinto Ryu, the sequences are there, they're long sequences, and I personally think these sequences, no matter what, are just different ways to teach you how to react to an enemy sword at certain positions. I think most swordsmen would agree with me. If inside, and I actually spoke to Otaki Sensei. I went to visit Otaki Sensei, and he said, we train like this and we do this, but actually this would be the cut and that would be the end, and the next 3 seconds of a kata would be, and that would be the end, and the next 3 kata. So in that 20-second, 30-second sequence that they have in Katori Shinto Ryu, he says actually there's about 20 or 30 techniques there that you can use, and that would be end the fight. You don't fight like that. That's how we train to get fluid, and the fight ends at this point. You just change the target, which is what he said. So, hold on. Japanese used a... Hold on. So, I can't even read my writing on that one. Hold on. I don't understand that one. Sorry, guys, I've got my notes went wrong. Okay, he says in some of the Chinese manuals, there's an extremely long habaki, with like a collar on the blade. So there's the blade, there's the tuba, and there's a collar that goes like that. And he says you don't find that in Japanese. I think there is. There's a Japanese. Which somebody answer it for me, guys. Which school has it where they actually have a collar on the outside of their thing, and they use it almost half-handing, like in in historical European martial arts, and they use half-handing basically, or half-swording, and they do the same in Japan. They have that as well. So which it claims to be from an older system with the longer swords. So to answer these questions from the gent, I agree wholeheartedly that this changed a little bit from Japanese. The question I have is, what swordsmanship do we have that we know is Japanese and goes back to the Sengoku period, i.e. the year 1599 or before? Yep. What do we have there? The only one we have that is actually does that is this, because it's 1614 and it claims to be 3 generations old. So it's 3 generations old, and it also says it's Japanese. Now, this, he says there is a linguistic problem with the word Japanese, and there is. The Japanese, it is Japanese in style. This is a Japanese person. You can debate, but Jack Chen from Longsword One, Eric Shahan, all the people, nobody ever disputes that it doesn't mean Japanese. It literally is, this is Japanese. And if I remember rightly, and the gent who emailed me, just check it, at the beginning he says, my master, Wind Mountain master, and this master studied with the Japanese man, literally a Japanese person. So we'd have to check that. But nobody disputes it's Japanese. Even the gent who sent me the questions doesn't dispute it's Japanese. But there is a little bit of a linguistic thing. Is do they mean a Japanese person, or has this Japanese style come to China and changed over 3 generations? Now we know with Yagyu, absolutely, it changes. In 3 generations, they change dramatically. And I've been doing this recently. Yagyu changed a lot within 3 generations. It's not a totally different system. Like, for example, you start in Jodan, you do X move. By, like, a few generations, they're in Chudan. And they're doing a similar move. So the move is the same-ish, but they start from Chudan to do an X move, not from Jodan. So there is changes. So probably there are changes here. So the questions are, how much did the spearsmanship, or the staff manuals, the Chinese manuals, interfere with the Japanese swordsmanship? And the other issue we've got is, how much of this is Japanese but doesn't look Japanese, because by the time Japanese swordsmanship starts to get fully recorded, 100 years has passed by and it doesn't fit. Okay, but that's because it changes. We also have Musashi. Musashi says this is how you should fight, and he fought in the Sengoku period. He was 15 years old, 14 years old at the end of the Sengoku period, roughly. He was fighting as an adult. He'd killed a few people and he was learning swordsmanship, and he says they've stopped doing it the way they used to do it. This is a big thing that nobody pays attention to. Miyamoto Musashi says what they do now is not what they did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, they fought differently. Now they all fight in this strange way, and it isn't true and it isn't right. And he says it's all flowery and nonsense like. And that's over a 60-year window. So from when he's born to when he writes the Gorin no Sho is at roughly about 60 years. And he will be compos mentis by 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And remember, medieval children grow up quick. And by 13, he's a fully killing. By 14, he's a man, and he's fully killing people. And he says, I remember, I was 14 at the Battle of Siege of Osaka and all that. Well, he's also at the Siege of Osaka, isn't he, when he's nearly 30, I think. So he's like been through all of these, and he says, that's not fighting. And then we get this Chinese manual that doesn't look Japanese, as stated by the gent. And Musashi has to be listened to, because he says, we didn't used to fight like that. This is more how we used to fight, with one hand, and we'd fight and you don't take up stances like that. You sort of have a stance but not really a stance, and you'll be in this position or you might be binding, and we have this Chinese manual that says similar sort of things, and it fits in. We're facing spears, not swords, which it correctly should be doing, all those. But the question still remains, it must be influenced by Chinese thought. Okay, no problem, we do, but is it still a reliable source for us to say, okay, that gives us a greater, better understanding of Japanese swordsmanship in the 1550s to 1600. What do you think? Right, guys, that's turned into a bit of a long video. I was going to edit and put all the pictures in, but I'm just struggling for time like that at the minute. So I hope I've answered all the questions. Let me know what you think. Can you help down below? Find those things for me. Find those things for me. The holding onto the sword, the cross step. Let's find them, and we'll keep up on the comments and see where we go from here.